Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Matthew, welcome to the show.
Colin, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
I run this podcast by asking awesome guests, hey, who should I have on next? And you were one of the first people that Michael Tuso that came to mind when I asked three-time podcast champion Michael Tuso. And so I'm super excited to have you on. One, because, I have a lot of respect for what he did. Two, I know you worked together. Three, we had an awesome pre-interview where we were talking about sales leadership and career development. And admittedly, this podcast is secretly helping me fill in all the gaps. And I kind of jumped from I spent a bunch of time in sales. I now spend a ton of time focused on prospecting and sales development, and my sales management game is very thin. And so I always love getting an opportunity. And I think also in the industry, there just isn't enough sales management training, experience, guidance for new managers. So anytime I get a chance to talk to somebody who's been running sales development teams or managing salespeople for a while, it's always a pleasure. So with that said, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to talk through this great opening, and also on that same point with the Michael Tuso part, three-time podcasts are pretty incredible. I actually made a post about him today, so very coincidental or serendipitous, but talked about all the things he taught me, so excited to share some of that here.
Awesome. I want to open up with, sales and sales management are two different sports. You could be, and I've seen people, and I would factor myself into this, that I loved being a salesperson. I struggled as a sales manager. Talk to me about, what do you love most about sales leadership?
Yeah, good question. There's always that, does a good sales rep make a good leader, and the opposite is very true too. Maybe you're not the best rep, but you're an incredible manager. I think, and again, people also have said did you choose it or did it choose you? I think it definitely chose me. I think tech sales in general also chose me. I had no goal or thought of that being a career whatsoever, even, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, to be honest, even after I'd done my own stint. But I would say the difference for me was, I loved individual contributor side. I liked getting what I needed to get done and knowing that I control everything to an extent, right? I'm not working with other people or reliant on others. It's just, what am I going to do? I'm going to get my all. But at the same time, I grew up playing sports that were never an individual sport. I didn't grow up golfing. I didn't grow up playing individual tennis. I always played team sports. So for me to win all that stuff, it was still very much the team. So I think that was just something, subconsciously that was in my head. It was never an individual thing. And so then again, backtrack a little bit. Shelley Piper, 2019, joined the company as employee 20. Michael Tuso was the manager there, leader, sales side, owning everything: AMs, AEs, BDRs, SDRs. So there's a team of 3, and I quickly went to find success. And I had past experience being an AE, being an SDR, and actually kind of doing a little bit of sales development leadership, but I actually went back into an SDR role because I didn't want to be an AE again. And I guess, maybe this is the reason, is it felt very repetitive to me as well. I didn't have the aspirations of one day being a VP of sales or a CRO or anything like that. So I was like, okay, this is the job. I don't know how long I can do this because it's just not exciting anymore. Yeah, maybe a new industry or new product could change that up, but it just wasn't, for me, I guess. So when I came back into the tech world and B2B SaaS, I started as an SDR because that was my experience, but I had no clue what I wanted to do next. I was like, okay, maybe recruiting, maybe marketing, maybe something, but I know I can get a job with this experience, and I just want to work for this company because it looks great and it's remote. Then, 2, 3, 4 months in, we have the conversation about moving to AE, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I'd already started to help one of the struggling reps. and had a lot of fulfillment there. And so they're like, well, what about like leading that team? Because Tuso was, moving also more towards like the AMs and the AEs. And I was like, yeah, I guess that sounds interesting. Like, again, this is different than what I've done before. I don't know if I like it or hate it, but I quickly realized that I absolutely loved helping other people like hit their number. It was so much more fulfilling to see them do well than it was for me to do well, especially to like coach and train and like see the improvement. That was amazing. And then on top of that, like building a team and like a culture was also very, very cool. And I realized quickly, like, that's in my hands, right? Like, I can hire these people. I can hire the people that I want or that I see something really cool in. I can create this own kind of like mini company culture within this team because it's going to be very close knit. And that also like inspired me a lot. It was almost like, you don't have to be a CEO to create something great. Like, you can be as small as like just the head of your department or the head of your team or whatever it is. So I think that's where the sales leadership came into. And then the last thing I would add specifically to like sales development is you're dealing with a lot of people who are maybe a little bit more junior or it's their first time, in this space. They're coming from different industries or they're right out of college. And so you get to see, like, again, very drastic increases of their potential and their development. Whereas, maybe later down the line, it's not as drastic because they have a lot of experience and it's just not 0 to 100. Maybe it's, 80 to 120. So I love seeing that and being a part of it and then, watching where they go and been able to, and very fortunate to see a lot of people do really great things in my short amount of time. So excited for the future too.
Thank you for sharing your perspective. That's really awesome. The only thing I would 50% disagree with you on is the fact that the CEO is more important for setting the culture. I think the managers on the front line, as a CEO,
For sure.
are going to do so much, right?
No, absolutely.
It's only about what you like. I can only set the culture that I set with my managers. But like, if I'm doing crappy things, but I have a really strong management underneath me, then like it doesn't absolve my sins, but it makes it a much better experience for the SDRs that you're managing. So I don't think one is more important than the other. I think both are critical.
Yeah, no doubt. And I totally understand that perspective as well. I like it.
It's funny. You picked an interesting time to get into management because we're talking about, the career development here, but the last 5 years have been bananas. You had COVID, you had the post-COVID growth where everybody's like, we just raised billions of dollars off of a napkin, and then a downturn. It's been like managing SDRs these last 5 years because these are people that, I hesitate to say kids, but they're not kids. They're adults that are taking the first steps in their career, and like, man, what a chaotic first couple of steps they're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, and just going off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but I think like at least on my LinkedIn or resume, my first official month of being like the SDR manager at Chili Piper was March 2020, which is also what I equate to being like the kickoff of COVID. And also on top of that, I was in Hawaii. So like my first week of being a manager, I was in Hawaii on vacation. COVID's happening. So it was bizarre in general, but it's, kind of like that baptism by fire stuff. I think, you get thrown into a stressful situation and it makes or breaks you, but also you kind of have that feeling of, well, how much worse is it going to get? Or, this is as tough it's going to be. So when things are great, you're like, wow, we're humming. And also it's just, again, part of the experience of life, which is never know what's going to happen. And you got to be prepared for whatever and build your team up, build yourself like ready to kind of handle whatever they have. And I always do try to find like a silver lining. I think a lot of ways, and again, I feel like I've been very fortunate for both Chili Piper and Mosaic that during these moments, we were able to pivot our messaging very well to make it a must-have rather than that nice-to-have. So that was helpful. But yeah, I mean, from the ups and downs, again, it's been very interesting. It's been very different. I think you're always sort of uncomfortable, which is also great. I think, I have a quote, it's life begins outside your comfort zone. And so without you ever being able to actually be comfortable, you're constantly having to do that 1%, get better, learn, stay on your toes. So yeah, COVID completely switching things up. Like you said, then it turned into, okay, everyone's scaling like crazy. And so then I had to learn something a little bit new. And then the market downturn, okay, like now we got to get really lean and really focused and efficient. And so I think if anything, it's given me good skill sets that I will be able to apply at some time in the future when it happens again, inevitably. Maybe not COVID specifically, but something happens that makes things a little bit tougher. And then there's another recession, or, I think it just prepares you for the future. And that way you're not really worried or concerned because you just have those reps during different economic times. But absolutely no doubt it's changed, so much. And the way you operate is so different in each, situation. So
Totally.
exciting.
And I want to double click on that. But before we go into kind of what's changed and what are you doing differently now than versus 6 months ago, I want to set the table and have a look at what is your career development, like the overall process look like. So like, where does it start? Where does it finish? What are the steps? Let's go into that. And then once we've kind of set the table there, then we can talk about what's changed. So tee it up. Like, what does your career development process look like?
The fundamentals, the basics, you don't know where they're coming from. Again, you could have someone who's been a really successful BDR for a whole year who comes and joins your team, and you could have someone directly out of school who studied film and media studies like myself. You could have someone who, had a successful career selling cars. And so you do, and again, it goes into crafting your own process. Every company's going to be a little bit different. So understanding the basics of that specific role at that specific company, I think, is very important. Your tech stack, your common objections, the way that you should just take, your own ownership, your accountability, et cetera. That ramp time is going to be different for everybody. Sometimes, maybe you have your perfect ramp time of that 3 months or 2 months or whatever it is at your organization. But realistically, that ramp time might be 2 months for someone who knows what they're doing, or, 6 weeks. For someone who's brand new or taking a little bit longer, it could be 6 months. So I think having a sort of, I don't want to say vague, and it goes into like this career development in general, having these milestones that you expect people to hit by a certain time frame, knowing that some people are going to fly way past that and some people are going to be a little bit slower. So the basics is that first one. The next part of their career development obviously is taking on a little bit more responsibility after they've done certain, both, quantitative and qualitative metrics. I don't think everything should just be simply numbers. At the same time, there does need to be numbers involved. We're in sales, so it's very crucial. But there's a lot more that's outside of that. So, I'm a big proponent of having a very collaborative team. So making sure that they're, I always say this, I don't care if you're the top performer. If you're not helpful, if you're not here to like win as a team, then I don't want you on that team. I'd rather have the B player who makes everyone else around them be better than the person who's an A+ player and like makes everyone miserable. So that's part of like what I expect them to do to, again, continue up the ladder. And then from there, again, these like micro promotions, whether it's, you have your SDR 1, 2, 3, or it's SDR, senior SDR, team lead, having these things that are actually, tangible and they can go after, can motivate and inspire until it gets to that spot where it's like, what's next?
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that because it's a really interesting piece. I think it comes down to like expectations. You look at, I started playing Call of Duty recently and like, I was reading about like, oh, how do you do this? How do you do that? And there's conversations about people, and no judgment here. I don't have time for it because I got a company, I got kids, and I 100% would go and do all these things if I had the time. So I'm saying this without judgment. People are like grinding and doing these random challenges to earn like a skin on their gun. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that, to me, something clicked when you were describing the microphones. Like, if people are willing to do that to keep it fresh, like this is what they're expecting when they come to work.
Yeah.
Is that your experience?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you look at it like gamification, right? There's all those tools. Like, what are those there for? It's like, because people, they like it. It's going to motivate them to do better. And it can be like, hey, it sounds so silly, but the skin is a perfect example of that. You and I could just say, hey, let's go see who can dial more or who can book more on the phone or who can add more accounts and whatever that is. We can say that. That's one thing. That's its own challenge. And like, maybe we care, maybe we don't, whatever. We could also be like, hey, I bet you $5. Now it's a little bit more intense. But then if there's a software that like is attached to my dialer that if I win, I have explosions that go around and I get like a gold star next to my name, that's probably going to be the most motivating one. And it's just like the same thing. You're still doing the same action. It's just the way it's like framed and presented. Like casinos, and I didn't realize this, is like, all the explosions and the lights and stuff when you do stuff, even if it's like minuscule, like, you didn't win $1 million, you won $10, but it looks and feels so like exciting. It's just like, I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, but I know that obviously helps things. So the micro promotions are the same thing. It's, if I said, by 6 months, you'll just get a little bit more responsibility and maybe a little bit like a pay bump or something, that's different than being like, once you've accomplished these and checked these off, then you get this title and you get this, and then you can feel better because now you're different or you've won something. It's like, I think it's just part of our nature. But it is crucial because if you don't have that opportunity for people and they just see, like say 12 months I'll be an AE, but I have to go from 0 to 12 months and there's nothing in between. Instead of 12 months there's AE, but at 3 months you get this, 6 months you get this, 9 months you get this. Like, someone's probably going to take that job just if that's all they knew about it.
So help me understand this, because this was something that I think I glossed over in the pre-interview that I think is really interesting. How are you doing this for SDRs? So do you have like tracks for, say, calling skills and objection handling skills and email writing skills and sequence building skills? Are there different tracks to kind of advance your skill sets there and test for it? Or yeah. How are you doing these?
That's a good question. I've had something similar to that in the past. Here currently, no. I think again, like that's, as your org gets more mature, that's a fun thing to do. And when you're just like full on building something from scratch and need to create pipeline, if I was focusing on that, I don't know if we'd be doing as well.
Yeah.
But,
top in a place.
There. So, but for sure, like that is something that's very helpful. And so when we talked about like the qualitative, quantitative stuff, there is the like, cool, you X amount of opportunities in a quarter, which is your quota, and have to go over 100%, plus this little exercise, which might be something about like a prospecting challenge, whatever is like very crucial to being successful in that role. So again, like if all we did was cold call and we didn't have to go build our own list in Salesforce, I probably wouldn't do anything with building lists in Salesforce. It would all be about your cold calling skills. Right now, currently, what we're very successful at is doing emails and objection handling, prospecting the right list, finding good triggers, and like hitting them with the right messaging. So the exercises are relevant to that, right? It's how would you, prospect this list? What would you build? And then here's are some questions that are like a little bit more high level that get you to think. And so just making sure that they understand the big picture stuff too, instead of just like their day to day. I had an old CEO would always use the word sharp. Like I want to make sure they're sharp. And it's like, that's kind of what you're testing for, right? There's a difference between taking the things in, regurgitating it, but have no idea what you're doing versus like being conscious, thinking through it, thinking critically, and like having a better response to something. So I'll weave in some of those. But yeah, a very mature org, yes, that's sweet. Like cold calling skills are here, you're leveling. We do have leveling here, but it's very, very hard to develop it into such like a specific, very gradable like metrics. But I'm hoping we get there, sooner rather than later.
100%. And no judgment here. I think the context is really helpful for anybody who's listening who's in a similar position. If you were a brand new SDR team, under a year old, you're not, you're still working on out all the kinks to hit quota. This is absolutely not something that's top priority. If you're in a bigger company and you're consistently hitting quota and you're looking for, okay, well, my next priority this quarter is I want to focus on SDR longevity. Or SDR experience or whatever, or if you're a sales enablement person, yeah, cool. These are fun things to do. I did want to tangent on, you said something interesting about training people on how to find buying triggers. I'm curious, what's more important, a good targeting or good messaging?
That's like that's tough, right? It's both. Like it has to be both. If your targeting is great, your messaging sucks, nothing's going to happen. If your messaging is fantastic and your targeting is terrible, like I would say I'll go with what's more important is your targeting. And the reason I say that is because a lot of outbound sales specifically, right, is like timing. Like that's the hardest thing that you're always fighting against. And I use this example. It's a terrible thing. People do it all the time. You could be in a sequence 2 years ago and I added you to that sequence, and then I worked a bunch of other stuff, but then I added you to the exact same sequence that you already saw like 6 months ago. And then I have a new rep come in and they add you to that sequence 2 months later, and then a new rep comes and they add you to that same. You've seen the same messaging like 17 times in the last like 2 years, and maybe you've never checked any of them, maybe you hated all of them, maybe you just ignored them, and then finally you see one and you're like, oh yeah, definitely would love to take this call. And they're like, look, it worked. And I'm like, yeah, but like that's terrible experience. even if it still booked the meeting. And I say that because like that targeting was good. It was just, it took that time for you to like realize a pain or whatever. And maybe the messaging wasn't super clear, but after a while you did some digging because you're like, why are they keep still reaching out to me? So also the targeting is more important because of that. Because you're targeting the absolute wrong people and your messaging is insane, you're probably just gonna be booking a lot of unqualified meetings or the wrong people. So targeting for sure, but messaging is crucial as well. 1A, 1B.
At least we've answered that, and maybe that's out for debate. I 100% agree with you, by the way. We also answered in the pre-interview, chicken or the egg comes first?
Yeah.
First.
I have, and I'm waiting on the egg.
So you got to buy a chicken.
Exactly.
I love it. Thanks for the detour. I'm curious about the kind of to the previous comment about like when is the time and the place for investing in these like micro promotions or really building that out. How do you make sure that you're kind of making a balancing between learning and prepping for the next role and performing in this role? Because I've seen reps where you get your top SDR, they've got their eye set on AE, it's all they care about, and they get so wrapped up in the AE and learning the AE role, they forget that they're still in the SDR role, which is like understandable, but it also is going to compromise their opportunity to hit that AE role. So talk to me about how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's super tough. And I think, to be perfectly honest, that is almost like a case by case thing. I haven't figured out like a one size fits all there. You have the people, I think, on your team that you know are going to be distracted by shiny objects, and you have the ones you know they get that this is their role right now and they're going to try to achieve that next step. So again, I think you need to distinguish that, and it goes into kind of motivation in general, right? Like again, everyone's different. Like what motivates you? Is it money? Is it time off? Is it career development? Is it your title? Whatever. I think that's also a very similar case here. But to that point, the framing of that growth plan is very specific to, and again, it could be different. If your org is, you get half quota while you're upboarding into the next role, that's great. But if it's not, then like it needs to be very apparent, hey, you're given this opportunity, or we're going to start to, give you resources, get you demo certified, give you all these other things that are leading to this goal. But at the same time, you need to maintain, where you're currently at. You can't drop the ball there and say, oh, I'm training to be an AE. And it's just like, well, now you're 20% of your quota. So like, this is off the table now. Yeah. So it's like I think again, understanding that your current role is still that you're doing day to day, and these other things are there in your it's time management, it's like focus, it's all that stuff, which again, even in that upboarding transition, it's a great way to like suss out how is this person able to handle the next step, because the people who know how to time manage well and they know how to balance things, it's very similar. Once you become an AE, you got to balance a million things. You got to probably prospect still, you got to do all your admin stuff, you're selling, you're building decks. So it's like, you can't handle still doing this role and trying to learn the next. And like that next role is not going to be any easier than just making that transition in general. So, I mean, like for us, right, it'd always be, you got to earn that next role. And you might say it later, but like do it before you have it, make it a no brainer, have everyone kind of being your support, but you cannot let that current role drop. Like that's the worst thing that you could do. And again, I think sometimes it's a little tough for people, but usually they're good and they figure it out and they start to understand. It might need a kick in the butt, 2 weeks into that first month of having that opportunity, but then they're okay. Or I'm trying to think of a time where it hasn't worked out. So knock on wood, I don't think it has.
There you go. That was drywall, by the way, but we'll let that go.
You don't know what's over here. I might have a block of wood.
Fair. I know it's a tough question because it's sort of like saying, okay, well, you're playing football. Which direction do you throw the ball? It's like, well, obviously forward, but, to who and why is very context dependent. But the answer is almost always forward, I think.
Yeah, you try to. I mean,
that's kind of the point. I want to follow it up with, I know making the jump from SDR to AE can be a big, it's obviously a big step. It's a different role. How do you make sure that they don't balk when they hit that next role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say the first thing here is alignment with that next manager or leader, right? So you're doing a handoff, simply like a SDR, BDR booking a meeting for an AE. Like you have to make sure that both of you have an understanding of what is on their side of expectations and what's on your side, and fill any of those gaps in between. That's to me the biggest and most important thing is whoever is running that AE team, what do they expect them to be at level wise that are in my control? And then on my end, what do I need to do so that I can give them to you as close to being successful as possible? That's also in my hands, right? Like I'm not probably going to be the one who's demo certifying you because that's not my day to day. I don't run demos, but there's a lot of education and other things, processes, things like that I can help with, and that I can move you along the lines. And then the VP of sales, director, whatever, whoever AE manager, we need to make sure that there's not going to be that like drop ball of like, oh, I thought they were doing that, or I thought they were doing that. So alignment, I would say, is number one. Yeah, to me, I mean, that's kind of everything. If you're not aligned, like it can slip, it can fall. Nothing is worse than that person then not being successful or having a really bad experience. And then either A, I'm scared of what's next, or, I don't want to be at this, or it can just really turn into something bad. So, yeah, if you're going to make that growth plan, you have to make sure that you are aligned with whoever's taking over that next step, and that both of you can meet, as close to touching hands as possible so that handoff is good.
One thing that just kind of occurred as you were describing the situation to me was a podcast I did with Jamie Buss, and not the one I normally reference, but we did a second one on leadership and development. And she had this was at Zendesk. And so the context is much, much different. But they had a program where you get to shadow the next role up for a period of time. And like, I think for a small startup, that is absolutely not something that I would do, or I wouldn't institute like the full Jamie Buss system. But I think I'm curious your thoughts on getting SDRs to shadow AEs, more than they are, if they're not following through on the demos and things like that. Like, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, I'm huge on that for sure. That's like one of the smaller steps to take for someone who is like earning, deserving, wanting more. Is I'm always like, okay, you're going to start from listening to gong calls and like hearing that disco call. Like they're doing that, week 2 of onboarding because they got to hear all the terminology and see like what that next step is. But after that, like they should be listening or on other calls if possible. So, for instance, right now there's 2 reps that do want to move forward with the next steps. They've earned it. They deserve it. Do we have the spaces open for those roles right now? Maybe not. But in that whole time frame while we're waiting, I want them to be as prepared and as ready as possible. So it's almost that little light switch, It's like you've been sitting there waiting to drive, and it's not like you have no idea and you're just waiting to sit in the seat to figure it out. Like you've been driving, on the ranch for 4 or 5 years, and now you're going to take your driver's permit test. So like I want them to be there, and part of that is hop in on AE's calls, listen to what they're doing. One of the reps was like, I do a whole pre-disco, like what I've learned, whether it's cold call, email, just researched. And then I tried to like ask certain questions on that, and I share it with the AE, just get their thoughts. So they're like starting to be proactive and take real like ownership and accountability of like, I didn't tell them to do that. The sales director didn't tell them to do that. And they're like, I want to do that before, just because like it's going to level me up and continue my education. And I'm like, well, that's the exact stuff that you should be doing, because now I'm like, cool, you're taking this in your own hands. You're taking this very seriously. I respect that. And it's only going to help you when it comes to that time when I said like, earn it and like make it obvious. If someone's like, oh yeah, what's the, situation on moving a BDR to an AE? It's like, look what this person's already been doing. I think they're ready, rather than, oh, okay, is it like now time to start leveling people up? So huge fan of that.
Totally. And it kind of brings us back to the point I made earlier that I mentioned I'd come back to. We all have reps that the last 3-6 months have been very different compared to the previous 6 months. I'm curious what you're doing now, differently now versus 6 months when it comes to career pathing. And for context, in case you're listening to this a couple of years down the road, we just went through like a crazy boom in the startup world and then a huge pullback. And so the context here is there at one point were lots of jobs and promotions and lots of upward mobility for SDRs. And now, not necessarily so much, probably some more than others, as it probably always would be. But I'm curious, what are you doing differently now than you were 6 months ago?
Yeah. And the first part is the framing of it, right? And I say this all the time. I joined Mosaic in July of 2021. The first BDR that I hired was October. So we had October until, I don't know what you want to call the start of all this stuff, last June, July, August, somewhere in that time frame. So we had almost a year where things were, business as usual in this up and down world that we've already had with COVID and everything. So I had my growth plan that I took from Chili Piper, which was you do this within a quarter or within 6 months, you move to senior, you do this, and you move to team lead. The whole goal of trying to get to an AE by, a year, 12 months. You could move faster if you want to break things. And, again, it doesn't apply to everybody. There's the people who are going to overperform. So I had taken this thing in place. We had a rep who did it, the one that was hired in October. The next rep that I hired was in April, and then May, and then June. And so even around like the June time, I was kind of getting this idea like, okay, starting to see things are slowing down a little bit. It wasn't terrible, but our last rep was hired in October of 2022. So when I had that conversation, I was like, and their question, which is a great question, right? What is the growth? What is the upward mobility? What does all that look like? And I said, like, I'm not going to lie. I'm like, honestly, it needs to be revamped because it's not the same that it was when I first created it. Obviously, these things they're living, breathing documents. They should be updated all the time anyways, but especially in this environment where, to your point, you used to be able to like hop in, you kick butt in like 6-7 months, they're not going to want to lose you. So they're going to do something to make you like excited and whatever, especially if you're seeing success, because they know like, well, you're probably going to bounce for like an 8 role somewhere else. Nowadays, it's tough, and we have these people who have earned it and deserved it, but like the spot's not there. And so it's changed from building this thing that moves and rewards people who go above and beyond and are very successful to, I know that there's still, again, some uncertainty and some gray areas, but all we can do, and to what we just mentioned, is prepare you to like for that moment. So if a rep isn't on what that old track would be, I'm not going to have them go listen to a bunch of calls and jump into things and work with AEs on that stuff, because they need to focus on like their current job and being successful there, hitting their quota repetitively, being consistent, making sure that the little minor details are all checked off. For the reps who are doing that, and they are, 120% of quota every single month or quarter, I want to reward them, but sometimes there's just not that spot open. So my rewarding is, what opportunities are you interested in that I can give you so that you can continue to level up your skill? I'm not going to throw an opportunity or some sort of like additional responsibility that you're not interested in. That sounds terrible. But I will be, if you want to be AE next, or you want to be a team leader or a manager, you want to do this, like, what skills can we work on right now? What can I give you? And the best case scenario is that a spot opens up and you're just ready for it. That's the best case scenario, the spot that you're interested in. The other opportunity that's there is maybe we find something that there is a need and there's no one really for that role right now. And it's a business opportunity that I can then bring to leadership and say like, hey, we need someone to do this and there's no one to do it, but this person is very interested and they're ready and like they want to move into it. So that's kind of where we're currently at, truthfully. And again, at Chili Piper in the past, we had something called Trailblazers, which was very similar as well. Like it was a type of rep that would go and like prove out new, verticals, industries, and new products, something like that. But a lot of them moved into like product and moved into other places because they were getting new skill sets that were a little bit different. So yeah, it's tough. I'd say also like transparency is like the biggest thing, right? Like we had our feedback cycle conversations in like February, and I said like once Q1 is done, because there was so much going on and it was very noisy and we're doing a lot of extra things, I was like, my whole focus once this is done is to properly like build out a new career development plan or growth plan here at this company, while still knowing that there's a lot of unknowns, because I don't know what June looks like and I don't know what October looks like. So I'm not going to put these really hard dates on things and be like, you do this by this month, you're here, because like, one, it's not my call. I'm not the CEO of the company or the board. Two, I don't know what's going to hold, but I will tell you these are the steps that we can take and we can try to find something. And again, if there's a business case, like I'm going to have your back and I'm going to do what I can do to make sure that you're growing, you're excited, you're motivated, you're pumped, and like you're being given the opportunities that you've earned and that you deserve based on, the work you've done.
I love that. The transparency and thinking creatively about the role in the org chart. It is like the sales role. I'm somebody who spent years learning sales or in sales and then had to learn product development, customer development recently. The two are so tightly linked that it's almost, I struggled with customer development interviews. We're basically talking to customers and understanding what they want.
Yeah.
Not because I needed to learn the skill, because I needed to unlearn some sales habits. Because product development, and when you're doing like proper day in the life customer development interviews, it's discovery. Discoing, baby. Yeah. And the hard part is like you get to the disco and you're like, all right. Okay, cool. Now let me tell you what I can sell. And you have to be like, we ain't got shit yet because it's not built yet. There was some like funny moments. And so I love the call out to like the product. It is one thing that I think I wanted to get into in high school and I didn't really understand what the path was. And I don't know if necessarily SDR is a direct path to product.
Right.
But I think it's closer aligned than you might think.
Yeah. And again, like that's in growth in general too, right? And I like to understand this earlier than later with everybody. And again, I'm saying this, every single person's an individual. You build all these things, but like can't force people into anything. I'm always like, what are you interested in next, right? It's gonna be like day one or in the interview process, because a lot of people, they'll say AE, but like they don't mean it. They don't want it. They just think that's like what's next. That's what they do. And then after a good chunk of time, and maybe you see like your own specific AEs, or you just see the sales process or whatever it may be, they're like, I actually don't know what I want to do. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, but also back to those micro promotions, I still want to keep them engaged with something. So even if they're like, I don't want to be an AE, it's like, well, cool. Like, let's level you and continue to do this, and we'll find something that excites you. And then also, similarly, people are like, like I was in that same box. I didn't want to be an AE, but I didn't really know what I wanted. And so there's people that have gone to product and marketing and recruiting and like everything. And it's very fun to see that. And again, like it doesn't matter what you want next necessarily. It doesn't have to be anything specific. It's just like, let's get you to continue to learn and grow. And like, that's my goal.
Love it. Matthew, I really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your process for career development and, what's changed, what's new, where's it going? If people are thinking, hey, this Mosaic looks cool, this Matthew guy looks like an awesome manager, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, find the LinkedIn. I think it's just Matthew Roberts, I would expect.
Matthew
Roberts
5.
I guess that's the tag, but I think if you type in Matthew Roberts Mosaic, I should also pop up.
I'll throw a link to his LinkedIn in the chat description.
It lives somewhere.
Or my own today. Love it. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Colin, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. Hope this is helpful for some people. And similarly, if you have any questions about it, you want to bounce ideas off, feel free to hit me up, and always happy to pick people's brains and ask questions myself. So thanks for having me.
Right on.
Hopefully this is helpful.
You betcha. Thanks again. And I always say thank you to the audience and see you next week. I always say it into the mic. I don't know. I'm just catching myself doing it. See you next week, everybody. Have a good one.